We had quite an interesting comment about just sort of medical risks of this sort of thing. So would there just be risks of pressure, infection in the brain, all of these kind of things, which could also be potential side effects for brain implants?
But, I can tell you that there is a big issue with infection, right, for brain implants, and that's the sad thing, because these individuals, you can look up the existing cases of neural prosthetics, for individuals who say have lost limbs, and for the case of the artificial hippocampus, although the artificial hippocampus isn't even actually inside the head yet, but the individuals who've had invasive chips put in, they can get infections, and they may not be able to even use the chips for several years. So that is something that people are working on. I know Elon Musk recently made an announcement about special polymers that were designed to detect more neural activity as well as reduce the risk of infection. So that's something that it may take 10 years for these neural implants to be safer to use.
So just say that was a question from Joe Parker. So thanks, Joe, for that question. And now we've got a question from Julia Bannerman Adams, who says, would AI chips implanted in the brain have an effect on emotions and personality, as well as obviously cognitive functions? But was there be any effect on your emotions, particularly with the Zen chip, which might be one that controls your emotions?
I so need that right now, and I think we all do with this pandemic going on. I mean, I suspect that should these kinds of enhancements become widespread, people would be able to decide what they wanted. So, there's no reason to think that some of these enhancements wouldn't enhance our emotional lives. I mean, some of us may want better mood regulation. And I would think that a cognitive enhancement could also change our emotional lives as well, right? I mean, think about how different you would feel if you became, say, massively better able to synthesize data, or far more intellectually efficient, or if you had a higher IQ. I mean, it could affect your emotional life.
And actually, someone else made a different point. That was Jem Walsh, who sort of follow up on that, said it's really interesting, but I'd like to hear the entire talk again, but merge in this futuristic clinical world, actually replaced with the decision to take antidepressants in the here and now. Or in fact, there are other drugs as well that you can take that would enhance brain function. And modafinil, I think, is one of the ones that comes to mind. So is it really that different from taking drugs to enhance your brain as opposed to putting a chip in?
That's why I mentioned the field of neuroethics, because neuroethicists have been grappling with this for years. And I mean, you already see a worry with attentional enhancement with college students, for example, and even professors. Some people feel like they have to take modafinil, and you certainly don't want it to be the case that in the future the students who are going to college feel like not only do they need a laptop, they need a brain chip. I mean, that could be really scary.
And actually,
and then what do you do about students who don't want to get them or can't afford them? I mean, you have two different intellectual classes, if you will, right? And that's horrific. And there's got to be ways to protect those who choose to not enhance. And also for those who choose to, there's got to be a way for it to be done in a democratic way.
And that's exactly the point that Kevin O'Brien made in the comments, actually. He said, would such upgrades need to be purchased to potentially widen economic divides? And I think the answer is almost certainly yes, right?
Absolutely. And, furthermore, there may be entire communities akin to the Amish of today, for example, who refuse to enhance because they don't want to live those kinds of lives. And so, not only do we have to make sure that, it's available to all those who want it, but we have to be able to protect communities who don't want it. I mean, it's a challenge. I mean, if you think about what's going on today in the US, there's political divides and now violence in the streets. So imagine if there's a divide of intellectual abilities or mood regulatory abilities. I mean, now the gap could get even greater. And, you know, I've talked to politicians about radical brain enhancement, and one thing that they ask, a lot of them, is they say, how would democracy work in this case when there are such radical intellectual differences between groups of people? I mean, way more radical than anything we've seen so far.
Wow. I'm just looking at the comments, there's absolutely loads of brilliant questions coming in, so I'm struggling to keep up. But I will take the, what question should I go for next? So, there was an interesting point off the back of that about kind of regulation. So, of course, we have things like in the US, you have the FDA, and here we have NICE and various other prescribing bodies for drugs. And so would there need to be some kind of international organization, a regulatory body? Because obviously you don't want people disappearing off to Uzbekistan to get some backstreet brain enhancement that's not available. So how would you sort of regulate these things, or could you even do that?
You asked the right person.
Exactly.
my husband's an FDA regulatory attorney who works on neuro law. So
Wow.
we sit around and talk about it's great. Yeah. This would be regulated in the United States by the FDA, the Food and Drug Administration. And there already are all sorts of applications out there and projects out there. We've looked them up together, hundreds. And that's good because the FDA, you know, they're there to make pharmaceutical drugs safe. And they can cause a lot of problems for big pharma. So, I mean, I think that is an essential ingredient to the medical safety, but that may not involve the issues I talked about, right? Metaphysical humility and the need for philosophical counseling. Ideally, it would be great if the FDA did actually mandate that people have to talk to counselors before they have radical brain enhancement.
Oh, so something's just popped into the comments, and something that I've been thinking as well. Was that Julian Ganest says there's no clear definition of consciousness nor a way to test for it. Now, I know actually that your time at Princeton was precisely looking at ways to test for consciousness. The only test that I know, we had a fantastic talk at the Royal Institution about sort of 6-7 years ago from an author called Brian Christian, who I'm sure you know, who wrote a book called The Most Human Human, which is all about the Turing test, which is the kind of basic test for consciousness that I know, where a computer tries to convince you that it's a human. But so what other tests have you developed that could be slightly more, I don't know, precise than that one?
Okay. So consciousness, philosophers will argue about what it is, and they will, I mean, because I'm trying to deal with, you know, the machine consciousness issues, I feel like I don't want to get too caught up in the philosophical arguments about how to define consciousness, because then I'll never get to the content of my own talk or my own work.
Yeah.
It's that bad. But I think there's a quick way of getting us all on the same page with consciousness. And that's simply that it's the felt quality of experience, right? It's what it feels like to be you. And I think people agree on that kind of rough sense of what consciousness is. Okay, so that being said, how do you know if it's there in machines? Okay, well, in the book, I offer several tests and I talk about existing ones. So, you know, one way of getting a better understanding of whether machines can be conscious, to go back to today's talk, is that as we begin to use neural prosthetics and parts of the brain that underlie conscious experience, we will get a sense of whether those neural replacements work. And if we get weird cases, like weird disorders of conscious experience that read like an Oliver Sacks book, you know, that'll give researchers a sense that, wow, like the chips of today, they just don't cut it. They're not the right stuff to underlie conscious experience. And if that continued for decades, and we went from say silicon chips to carbon nanotubes, and we just tried everything we could, and we tried every chip architecture, and we still kept getting crazy Oliver Sacks cases of consciousness deficits whenever we tried. That tells us that brain chips aren't the right stuff. Now, what does that have to do with machines? Well, I think it strongly suggests that the machines that are built of those same kinds of chips can't be conscious either. I call that the chip test, okay? So I developed that I gave it as a TED Talk, and I talk about it in the book. But there are other tests as well. So another one is something I developed with Edwin Turner. And I don't have time to really delve into the whole thing, but if you Google my name and Edwin Turner and Scientific American, you could find a very quick blog post on it. I also talk about it in the book, but that actually involves asking the machine questions about whether it has a felt quality to its experience. And I take that as a test that doesn't apply to all sorts of AIs. I mean, what if the AI is non-linguistic, right? So I actually suggest that we should let many flowers bloom when it comes to developing tests for machine consciousness. There should be lots of different tests because one test that is appropriate in the case of, say, a linguistic, highly intelligent AI may not capture phenomena of consciousness in another sort of machine.
A very comprehensive answer, as I'm sure I expected. And you will have some homework now as well once this talk's finished. Actually, this leads very nicely into a question from Heather Roberts, because you were talking about like the chip test, but suppose. Sorry, it wasn't from Heather. It was Julia Levy. Sorry. So she says that in Star Wars, there's a race that makes biological machines, so mollusk shell ships, for example. God, that's hard to say. Could it be possible to make a biological computer, so a computer that's made out of cells and that sort of thing, that would therefore be able to merge and bond with your brain much more easily than, say, a bit of silicon would?
Battlestar Galactica. Oh man, that makes me want to watch it. Yes. In fact, it's hard to tell the direction that computation is going to take in the future. But I could see, biological enhancements really taking off to make us part artificial, right? I mean, the notion of artificiality in the context of AI is interesting because something synthetic is artificial, but it could be a biological enhancement. And in a way, you could even create a biological computer. I mean, there's artificial life right now, which is a super intriguing body of research, creating artificial life, which, is playing with the boundary between synthetic and biological life by looking at evolutionary algorithms. So there's all sorts of possibilities for enhancing the brain.
And actually, I will ask Heather's question now. So Heather asks a question about legal responsibility, which is obviously something that comes into a lot of discussions around AI and autonomous vehicles and all that kind of stuff. So again, if something goes wrong with the AI chip, if my Zen chip suddenly malfunctions, it overpowers my brain, and I become very not Zen and go on a big, killing spree. From a legal perspective, then, how would we sort of deal with that?
Oh yeah, I've been meaning to write a paper on this called "My Chip Made Me Do It." So I think there's a serious issue here. We already have issues with free will and criminal responsibility to begin with. So I mentioned the field of neuroethics. This goes back to issues that neuroethicists have already been very concerned about. I mean, how do you even hold somebody responsible for their actions if they did it because, they had a mental illness? And what if somebody adds a chip to their brain and it malfunctions? I mean, who's responsible? And in the field of AI, there's the issue of trust already, the black box issue. Like, how do you even trust a machine? How can we make the computations of the machine transparent to the user so that we have a chain of responsibility, right? I mean, these issues really play out in the domain of debates over autonomous weapons. Yeah. Right.
Wow, that's
we humans could be augmented in capacities involving, the military. I mean, DARPA, the Emerging Technology Wing of the U.S. Defense Department, it's called DARPA. They've been working on brain augmentation for a long time.
Absolutely. So let's just carry on with. God, I've got so many questions here. So again on that on the idea of consciousness. So Pane Parmar asks a kind of very philosophical question that I'm going to leave to you, which is intelligence an emergent property of consciousness, or is consciousness an emergent property of intelligence? So will AI be able to replicate consciousness? So I guess this is an idea that obviously the higher order animals, us, chimpanzees, mammals, we generally think of as conscious, whereas as you get down the orders, you get to insects, you get to single-celled animals, and so is it thought that therefore consciousness emerges as this property that's kind of come about because we're intelligent, or the other way around? And will our AI help us solve this conundrum or not?
It's not clear that either one of those scenarios is right, actually. So I talk about a correlation thesis. In the biological arena, we notice that the most sophisticated intelligences also have very rich conscious lives, right? Humans, dogs, cats. And then as you go to more simple creatures, you even get to a point where, the creatures that aren't as intelligent are also ones where we might have a question about whether they're even conscious. So there does seem to be a correlation between intelligence and consciousness in the biological domain. But why assume that that sort of correlation is going to play out in the domain of AI? I see no reason for that. It may be that the most intelligent systems aren't conscious. So, I think transhumanists tend to assume that consciousness will be an inevitable byproduct of sophisticated computation. But in the book, I raise several cases in which that's just not the case. I mean, here's one example. I'll give you a quick one. So consciousness in humans is correlated with working memory and attention. I think I mentioned that in the talk, which is notoriously, both of those mental capacities are super slow. They're serial, they're sequential, plotting. I mean, we can barely hold a phone number in our working memory. I mean, we're pathetic when it comes to that. That's why so many people have attentional problems. We just don't have that much to begin with, right? That's why I live on caffeine. But anyway, so suppose machines are super intelligent. Why would they need consciousness? It's correlated with serial, sequential brain processing in humans, which is slow, right? I mean, a super intelligent machine could have access to the entire internet. It could be a computronium that is instantiated by an entire planet, something that uses an entire planet, all the matter and energy on a planet for computation. Why would it need to be conscious? I mean, and furthermore, like, it's going to change its own architecture. So why would it want to be human-like and have consciousness? I mean, I think that a wait-and-see approach to machine consciousness at this stage of the game, when we know so little, is something that I'm willing to endorse.
So you might have seen me smile at your answer there. It's only because your idea of a brain the size of a planet reminded me of Marvin the Paranoid Android from Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy.
Oh, cool! Oh, sweet.
So that triggered off a nice memory. So talking about as we were about animals, actually there's been a couple of questions on this. Actually, Louis van der Driesche says, "What about animals? Would a trans chimpanzee reach intelligence levels of humans today, or would it be limited by its current brain?" And Sahal Vaej also asked a very similar question. What effects would an AI chip have on animal consciousness? Will we be able to understand the language of animals by means of an AI chip? And as we're both dog owners, I think that would be amazing.
Oh, so maybe these people who are asking this question read David Brin, because he has science fiction books about uplifting. It's so cool. So the idea is uplifting animals and giving them greater intelligence, and he just plays with the idea. And I don't really have anything to say. I mean, I don't even want to touch the ethics of that. I'm sure someone, before the artificial hippocampus was tested in humans, it was tested in chimpanzees. It was called the chimpocampus then.
Very nice.
Right. Yeah, it worked. So anyway, read some David Brin.
Oh, so that's Brin, Bryn, B-R-Y-N? B-R-I-N?
B-R-I-N. Yeah, and I think the books have the word uplifting in them. I read them years ago. I was an intense science fiction reader, you can probably tell, back in the days when I had time to read fiction.
And then we've got a few more questions about animals and evolution. So Yihua Lin asks, does this mean we'll all be immune from natural evolution and controlling our own pace of evolution? Now, some might say that we already stopped evolving and started controlling our environment thousands of years ago, but do you think this is true?
That's a really good question. Just 1 second. Let me plug in my computer so it doesn't turn off in the middle of... Hold on. Just 1 second.
Oh, if it can hold out for another 5 or 10 minutes, we'll be grand.
Okay. All right. Okay. Yeah, I mean, there'll still be Darwinian forces at work in human evolution for a really long time. But after a while, we're now in the domain, and please don't misconstrue this, of intelligent design. Okay, you know what I'm saying, people, right? So, we're designing the mind through science and technology. And it's not that there won't be evolutionary forces in that context. I mean, the evolution just won't be Darwinian, right? There are other kinds of evolution that are non-Darwinian. So you can imagine in the domain of synthetic intelligence that the forces at work, I mean, this is kind of a trip to think about, involve things like AI regulation, which constrains the way that these intelligences can develop, or economic concerns. I mean, one of the things that scares me the most about the enterprise of mind design is that the financial considerations of companies like Google and Facebook are playing with minds. They're playing with the evolution of minds as we move into the future. And so the issue might become, if you want to see how minds will develop, follow the money. Oh, right. Yeah, that scares me. I lose sleep over that kind of stuff. That's why I do the work I do on this topic, because I don't think we want to leave the future of the mind to Facebook.
Well, absolutely not. An interesting, more to the broader point is that maybe what happens if we go the other way and actually this becomes a government mandated thing that everyone gets their enhancements when they're 16 and that's it, they go off, they get their enhancements fitted and it's sort of a thing that everyone gets. Would we then end up with a society where everyone will have the same level of intelligence? And surely that would mean that some people who have to do the jobs that don't require huge amounts of mathematical reasoning or whatever, like being a truck driver or whatever, how would we fill those jobs if everyone's suddenly super smart and would get really bored with just doing many of the jobs that need doing?
Well, this raises a big issue about the future of employment, the future of work. I mean, this could be against the backdrop of a social utopia in which people have far more time to spend with their families, to have hobbies, and to do things they love. Or in a very different social setting, the very same enhancements could become a dystopian nightmare akin to what's depicted in the cyberpunk genre of science fiction by people like William Gibson and Rudy Rucker. And it's up to us to frame the setting with which we develop intelligence augmentation, right? Because I'm assuming that it will be developed. And over time, people will try to augment their intelligence. So, you know, it could play out in a number of ways. I mean, think about if you have brain chips in an authoritarian dictatorship. Look how AI is being used right now by China to monitor its population. A brain chip could become a device for thought control.
That's actually, so there was a question about this earlier, actually. I was just about to ask you, actually, which says, could computational implants be used by radical groups to change a person's sexuality or belief system?
Yes, I'm very worried about that. And Evan Selinger and myself wrote a piece on this for 10, which is a blog. We're both very, very concerned. And, you know, you might say, well, we're not in an authoritarian dictatorship here in like the US or the UK, you know. But the thing is that there's always the risk. And when we allow, you know, privacy breaches by today's AIs, when we don't have adequate AI regulation, we're setting up the possibility that a future civilization could not only have smartphones, which are selling our data, but brain chips, which are selling our innermost thoughts. And that's why today's issues are directly related to tomorrow's issues involving the future of the mind, and why, as we frame legislation, we need to bear in mind where it might be headed. Further, I mean, even if we never see an authoritarian dictatorship in the future of, you know, the UK and the US, you know, surveillance capitalism is a very real phenomenon here, you know, and all over. So, I mean, it's very important that we have adequate AI regulations.
Well, you can just imagine, in the same way that Facebook knows all the things that I like, knows all the people that I'm friends with, knows the places that I've been, et cetera, and using that data, it can then target very specific adverts to me. Just imagine how much better its targeting is going to get once it has a chip in my brain and then starts sending all my thoughts. So even, you know, I might be thinking about buying a lawnmower, and then suddenly, woof, lawnmower advert right in my face.
It's creepy, man. Totally. I don't know if people are watching Upload, that series. But that's a good dystopia. It's a good show, you know, with things like that happening.
So just on that note, I think it's probably time to draw things to a close, and just to say it's been an absolutely fascinating hour and a half. Final question is from Ruth Mayer, and I think you'll like this one. She says, what sci-fi novel on this topic would you recommend over all others?
Oh, I don't know if I could do that. Oh,
well, maybe 5 then.
Over all others. Well, since it's on brain chips, I think you'd probably like Rudy Rucker's Software. It's not that you're asking me what my very favorite science fiction novel is, but one that's kind of related to this. But a lot of people like the work of William Gibson as well. On this topic, on the issue of cyborgs. But overall, science fiction, I'm a big fan of the classics, you know, Arthur C. Clarke, Isaac Asimov, so.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time, Susan. It's been, as I say, an absolute pleasure to spend the last hour and a half in your company grappling with these, incredibly scary and seemingly sci-fi issues, which are actually going to be science present in, you know, the next 10, 15 years. So just once again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for everyone for all of your amazing comments and questions. Absolutely brilliant discussion again. So thank you so much for all the contributions, and sorry that I couldn't get to all of them. Once again, to all members and patrons of the Royal Institution, thank you so much for your support. We really appreciate it. But if you have enjoyed the stream, please do consider donating £10 to us. We are a charity. We don't get any government money, so we'll need all the help we can get in these troubling times. And also, may I strongly advise you to buy Susan's latest book, which will contain great depth and insight on all of the topics that she's been discussing, and has been brilliantly reviewed all over the place, from the Washington Post to lots of other places. So do please check it out, and thank you so much for watching, and good night. Thank you.
Thank you for having me, and thanks for the questions. I had a great time. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Take care.